Hello and welcome to Overcoming Polarisation, Paths to Common Ground, a podcast series from Debating Europe, Friends of Europe's Citizen Engagement Unit. I'm your host, Sabina Shanku, and I'm glad to announce that we're back from our summer holidays and restarting our usual posting schedule, where you'll be getting a few episodes each week on Fridays. We still have a few left in the Overcoming Polarisation series, and you'll hear them scattered in between other topics in the coming months. Today, we're looking at the bigger picture behind equity with the help of two of my most distinguished guests so far. I'm joined by Nadia Calviño, President of the European Investment Bank and former Economy Minister of Spain, for the first half of the episode. In the second half is my conversation with Pascal Lamy, the coordinator of the Jacques Delors think tank network with institutes in Paris, Brussels, and Berlin. Let's face it, Europe is feeling fractured. Whether it's politics, climate, tech, or trust in institutions, more and more people are feeling left out, unheard, and uncertain about the future. But what if we could flip the script? What if instead of fueling division, we looked for common ground? In this series, we're diving into the real issues behind polarization: economic inequality, climate anxiety, digital disruption, and bringing together voices from across the spectrum, whether it's policymakers, activists, business leaders, or most importantly, citizens' voices via our latest study, Voices for Choices. We're not just talking problems, we're exploring solutions that are fair, inclusive, and built to last. So, if you're ready to hear thoughtful conversations that go beyond the headlines and into the heart of what's dividing us and what could bring us back together, stick around. This is Overcoming Polarization. Let's get started. As I promised at the start of this episode, we're going to start with Nadia Calviño from the European Investment Bank.
For my first question, I'd like us to explore a topic that's very contentious to the young people in our study: the perceived tension between competitiveness and the kind of social protection model that Europe is known for. So the young people who participated in our Voices for Choices study actually have quite a low degree of trust in both governments and the private sector. They're also very circumspect at the idea that either of those would listen to them and have their best interests at heart or protect them in a crisis. Youth also nonetheless tend to prefer state intervention, and some are even looking towards degrowth, sort of rejecting a big part of the private sector. How can we ensure that both competitiveness and social protection go hand in hand and work for citizens and towards strengthening our continent?
Well, it's true that for the past 80 years, the European Union has brought to every citizen in Europe the promise of prosperity, the promise of peace, also the European way of life, which means also the social market economy. So it is a well-functioning market economy and a strong internal market of 450 million citizens that can bring profits and growth to companies, but at the same time, a very strong public sector that is ensuring second to none education and health for all citizens, inclusion for also those that are maybe more disadvantaged, more territorial cohesion, so that opportunities are brought to each and every corner of our union. And this has been the promise, and Europe has delivered for the past 80 years. We have been a continent of peace, prosperity, and social inclusion. The progress made by those countries that joined the European Union in 2004, for example, has been phenomenal in terms of economic and social progress. Well, we need to continue on the same track. We need to continue to deliver a better future for citizens around the whole EU. And this is what the European Investment Bank takes as its priority. We're investing in your future. We're investing in future opportunities for young generations so that they can also continue to enjoy peace, prosperity, growth, and social inclusion in Europe. But we have to really be very clear about it. We need to continue to grow if we want to preserve and finance these social and public services that we cherish.
Young people are in two minds about it because they are big supporters of the local economy and of made in EU products.
Well, we need to combine giving opportunities for local economies and small shops and farmers, etc., and at the same time ensuring that we have a large internal market, 450 million citizens. This is extremely powerful. Europe is a trade powerhouse. It is an economic and technology powerhouse, and this requires that there are also large companies with economies of scale that can drive innovation and bring shared prosperity. So we have to combine the two, and from the European institutions, and especially the European Investment Bank, supporting the regions is very important. Close to 50% of our financing goes to less advantaged regions of Europe. And these, I think, is part of the European Union's DNA, ensuring that whereas talent is equally distributed across the whole EU, people are just as smart in Estonia as they are in the south of Portugal. But opportunities are not fairly equally distributed. So it is our job as European institutions to bring opportunities where talent is. And we're devoting all our energy to doing this every day.
I'd like to go into another concern, which is affordable housing. The young people who participated in our study all pointed that out as a policy priority. And that goes hand in hand with other measures that they hope to benefit from, because they are very much fearing that their lives will be getting worse on the medium term and will eventually be worse than their parents' lives. Now, housing is something that had never really been championed at an EU level until recently, but the institutions seem to be reactive to this need. Could you tell us a bit more about how this new concern of citizens is being addressed at the highest levels?
One of the most surprising discoveries I made when becoming president of the European Investment Bank, I took it as one of my priorities in my first year on the job to travel and visit the 27 member states. And one of the most surprising discoveries I made in these visits is that access to housing is a challenge in almost all member states, whether they have strong demographic developments, like is the case in Ireland or Spain, or whether there is a very large portfolio and stock of houses that needs to be renovated, like the Baltic countries, whether you have a strong building industry or not. All countries are confronted with these challenges, and this is there are various reasons for this. There is a shortage of supply of houses due to the stop of the years of the pandemic, also increase of cost of buildings, and also the development and the deployment of short-term holiday rentals. The boom of tourism since the end of the pandemic has also brought this market boom of short-term rentals, which withdraw houses from the normal rental and acquisition market and bring prices up throughout Europe, and I would say even throughout the whole world. So there is not a miracle wand. There's not one single measure that can address this. You need to take regulatory measures to maybe restrict short-term tourism rentals. There is a need to recover and invest in the social housing stock that had been depleted or even destroyed in so many countries for decades. We need to also support younger families having access to the acquisition and, most importantly, the rental. We have to favor geographic mobility and support young families that are moving around in the whole EU. And that requires massive investment. So from the European Investment Bank, we are supporting the regions and the local authorities, which are, of course, primarily responsible for providing housing to all, with very important, with a new housing platform, where together with the European Commission, we are providing financing in all across the EU. Let me just mention, for example, we recently signed an important agreement with the cities of Lisbon and Porto to provide 10,000 new social affordable houses. I have also had the opportunity to visit important projects in Valencia and Barcelona in Spain. And we will continue to support the national governments, the European institutions, the local and regional governments, so that we can provide the financing that's necessary and ensure that future generations have the same opportunities of their grandparents in terms of having an affordable and a lovely place to live.
Exactly. I think, especially for people in my generation, that's one of the major things holding us back. Rent being extortionate or really difficult to find, and especially being mobile across the continent, trying to make a life somewhere else. Just thinking of cities like Amsterdam, where an apartment can cost 2,000 euros a month, that sets you back in life.
I can reassure you that all of us have housing as a top priority. Every single finance minister I have met in Europe considers this to be a top priority. Every single prime minister I have spoken to considers this a top priority. And they are really committed and taking all possible measures to address the different, varied reasons and the different causes that have led us to this problem. So I am confident that working together in an ambitious and efficient manner, we will be able to address it in the coming years.
That's great to hear. I think let's go into something that also looks at the long term, because young people's priorities are pretty long term. They care about their immediate situation tomorrow, but they really care about their future. Consistently, for the last few studies that we've been carrying out, one of the top priorities across the board has been climate action. Young people see that as the key to preserving their future and to creating a more equitable path forward as well, especially looking at areas that are going to be really affected even within Europe. Yet recently, the EU's priorities seem to have started to deviate away from that. Of course, there are other concerns. We have issues with defense and our economic viability, things that are really pressing. Defense is actually the top priority for young people in Poland compared to everywhere else. Is the EU doing enough to show people that their priorities, especially the long-term ones, are of utmost concern? That they're working in Brussels thinking of citizens before they think of helping out the private sector in the short run?
Absolutely. I mean, the top priority for anybody that has a public responsibility needs to be the public interest and listening to citizens. I know with my experience also as minister and vice president in my country for 5.5 years, we need to listen to citizens. We need to listen to the young. We need to incorporate them in decision making. And of course, we need to address their short-term concerns and our long-term challenges. Let me be a bit political here, because I was a bit surprised about the drop in vote by the young for green parties, more progressive parties that actually put climate change as one of their top priorities. And this also shows that right now, there is a strong concern in many countries. You mentioned Poland, but in other countries too, about security and defense. Yes, okay, we need to deal, of course, with these short-term challenges, but we need to stay the course with the green transition. It is really a no-brainer for Europe. It is not only a matter of having a cleaner environment, healthier cities for you in the future. It is and also reducing the cost of climate change, which we suffer every day now with floods and droughts throughout the whole EU. We see it, as you mentioned, the fires in Greece. We also see the floods in Spain. You also see the droughts in the north of Europe. So we have to adapt and invest in the frontline sectors so that we can ensure that we have a more sustainable economy and a better quality of life in the future. But we also need to ensure that we are successful with the green energy transition, because it is a no-brainer, really. We cannot continue to depend on fossil fuel producers. It is just a matter of environment. It is a matter of economic rationale. It is also a matter of strategic autonomy and security. So here at the European Investment Bank, we want to continue to be the climate bank. We have green investment as our top priority, and we are devoting more than 50% of our finance to projects that are contributing to a greener future. And this is clean tech innovators, this is energy grids and interconnectors, this is the deployment of renewables, this is clean water infrastructures, this is sustainable transport, trains and railways. This is all about ensuring that we make climate and competitiveness two sides of the coin, and we make the clean and green transition a European success.
To throw another element into this, we are also investing heavily in defense, which is not particularly the greenest industry. How does that fit into our hope for a greener future?
Well, we all have to be aware, and I am really sorry to say this, but we have to be aware that the world is changing. And in the world of today and in the current geopolitical context, we see traditional partnerships breaking. We see very important shifts. We see that there is an attack on democracy. There is an attack on our European values. So we need to fight for these values every day. And security and stability and peace is the starting point for any discussion. We need to ensure for the future that we continue to be a continent of peace and security. This is the starting point for any other policy priority. So right now, it's really clear that we need to step up our support for our own European capabilities in the area of security and defense. But these shouldn't drive a trade-off with the other top priorities, like making the green transition a European success. At the European Investment Bank, we are clearly committed to keeping the course in supporting a successful clean transition, and at the same time stepping up our support to Europe's security and defense capabilities.
I'd like us to go into a different direction, which I think is a very hot topic for the last year or two. Which is artificial intelligence. That's also something that creates a lot of insecurity in young people about their future, and a lot of people still don't really know what to make of it. Where do you see its role in the complicated nexus of competitiveness, social protection, and laying the groundwork for a secure and prosperous future?
No, you're absolutely spot on, because the changes that we're seeing in the geopolitical context and the global alliances and the blocks of countries that have been conforming the global order since the end of World War II, these changes in the global order are also at the same time being accompanied by an exponential acceleration of technological change. Whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or cryptocurrencies, whether we're talking about health tech or new energy sources, there is a technological change, a new era, really, a new industrial revolution in full swing in the world, which has accelerated since the pandemic. And of course, Europe needs to preserve its technological leadership, because we are real leaders when it comes to clean tech, we're talking about health tech. We have universities and research centers that are second to none. We also have some of the key players in the critical market of chips, for example. But what we are lacking is some of the large hyperscaler infrastructures that are basic for artificial intelligence development. And we need to be ready so that when the next breakthrough comes, Europe is in the leading group, of these new technologies. That is why from the European institutions, we're trying to reinforce our infrastructures, whether it is data management infrastructures or research centers, universities. We are also supporting the integration of these new technologies in our productive systems from large companies, but also SMEs. And we're trying to ensure that this is done with a full respect of European rights and values, because we need to ensure that artificial intelligence is the force for good. The Artificial Intelligence Act that was adopted in 2023 provides a very good framework, because it clarifies that there are some uses of artificial intelligence that should be simply prohibited. Let me give you an example. Instruments or tools that manipulate children into violence. I'm sure we all want that to prohibit this use of artificial intelligence. There are other uses that are absolutely innocuous and very good. Well, when we use Copilot, to draft a text, or when we use a search engine to look for information, this is good. This is a good use of artificial intelligence that should be promoted. Now, in between these two extreme situations, we need to make sure that we foster innovation and progress and technological development, but in a manner which is contributing to peace, to inclusion and respect in our societies. This is the European way of life that we need to preserve also in this new world order and in this new reality that will be brought about by new technologies.
And with this drive to making things a bit more efficient or taking them to a new level with artificial intelligence, are people justified to fear for their jobs?
Well, some years ago, I remember when we started to hear about artificial intelligence and digitalization. I remember that a lot of people were fearing for their jobs. The reality is that in the last years, Europe has created more jobs than ever. The employment levels in Europe are higher than ever. Unemployment is lowest, in our history. I think that with these new technologies, there are new jobs that are being created. Going forward, what is essential for the young people, and my advice would be continuously learn, continue to learn throughout your whole life, be flexible, adapt to the new technologies, and look for jobs in the areas of the future, whether it is clean tech or artificial intelligence, because what we need to ensure is that these new technologies enhance the capacity of people to work. They do not replace jobs, but they facilitate new jobs to be developed, and they make us all more efficient.
Because we briefly touched on the geopolitical situation in the world. And it's sort of, in conversations like these, it's always the elephant in the room, the United States. Not only did the new Trump administration throw a wrench into global competitiveness, they also withdrew funding for so many programs that helped people in the rest of the world. And I'm wondering, how has the role of the EIB changed in this new geopolitical climate?
Well, let me say three things. First of all, I was very impressed. A couple of weeks ago, we had the Finance for Development UN Summit in Sevilla, which came at a point in time where indeed the US is withdrawing from the multilateral order, which has served the US so well and which they created and led and controlled for the past 80 years. And my strong impression from that meeting was that while some are withdrawing from these environment, which is rules-based, is based on respect and win-win outcomes, the rest of the world is moving on. There was a very strong message and a strong determination to continue to build a strong multilateral system that can bring prosperity and peace around the world. And the second message we got was a strong call for Europe to remain a strong player, have a strong voice, and be a key anchor of peace, democracy, and mutual respect solutions, around the world. And this is the message I got from all our partners, from Africa, Asia, Latin America. And the European Investment Bank is in a quite unique position right now because we are the financing arm of the European Union. We're also the largest multilateral development bank in the world. And we are deeply ingrained into the UN system and the rest of multilateral development institutions. So with this double hat, we are determined to continue to play a key role in bringing shared prosperity, financing health infrastructure in Africa, financing key energy interconnectors in Central and South America, in supporting the private sector development in Asia, and most importantly, building strong partnerships for peace and prosperity throughout the world. And let me, a final thought on my side. I am a very determined person. I can tell you, here at the European Investment Bank, we're fighting for a strong Europe. We're fighting for global health. We're fighting for democracy. And this is the good fight. So my message to the young people is the future is not written. There is no such thing as mission impossible. It is in your hands to shape the future for all of us, and you should join the fight.
Now, to move on to Mr. Lamy and our conversation. So in our Voices for Choices study, we involved young people from 5 EU countries, and many of them expect to be worse off than their parents. They want to feel supported and feel that the state is providing for them in the same way that it provided for their parents and maybe for their grandparents. But the same programs that boosted their parents' and grandparents' well-being are now being seen as something that conflicts with economic growth and competitiveness. So, how can we ensure that economic growth and competitiveness don't leave the youngest and most vulnerable citizens behind?
The world is awful. Second, the world is much better than it was. And third, the world can be much better than it is. The three things are true altogether. It's not because one is true or not true that the other is true or not true. And I think that gives you the direction of my answers. If you look at Europe and its prospects for the times to come, let's say the few decades to come, there are good reasons to be worried. And Jacques Delors, who's one of my masters, used to say Europe has a choice between decline or survival. And that's a bit what transpires from your question. I can understand why young people say Europe has to invest in climate to address the big ecological crisis we have to face. Now we know that Europe has to invest in defense because it's surrounded, at least on the east and maybe somewhere on the west, by foes and not friends. And third, part of our capacity to do that will depend on making our economies bigger, more efficient, more competitive, which then, as they see it, might necessitate an arbitrage between competitiveness, structural reform, making our economy more efficient, making roughly people work more on the one side, and on the other side, keeping our European way of life, which is with a much higher level of welfare than anywhere else on the planet, and with a relatively low time spent at work as compared to others. Now, my point is that I don't think there is a contradiction like this. I think there is a way to keep our European model, which combines an efficient market economy and a welfare state, provided we work on both sides, provided we make our economies more efficient, and provided we reform our welfare systems that were conceived at a time where the problems the welfare system had to face and the way it was doing it was different from what it should be now. So, in a nutshell, I believe we can make our economy more efficient. Our productivity in Europe is too low. Our potential rate of growth is somewhere around 1.5%. That's half of the US, a quarter of China, and probably a sixth of India. That's not sustainable. I believe that if we don't make our economies more efficient and larger, we won't be able to sustain our welfare system, who are costly, and there are good structural reasons for expenditure to grow, like our demographics, which are bad because we are aging, and there is, as we all know, a sort of resistance to immigration, which is going to be a problem in the future. So we need a more efficient economy to sustain our welfare, but we also need to reform our welfare in order, in my view, to make it more focused on the real needs of the real people in need in society. I know it may not be politically correct to say that welfare, which is to be addressed to everybody in a way, in a sort of egalitarian, equitable society, I prefer in social welfare equity to equality, meaning some people are more in need than others. And those are the ones on which we need to focus the system that we have on the ground that you cannot leave aside of society for whatever reason. People who have either by capacity or by birth or by the accident of life, not the same capacity as others to thrive in life. So my answer to this question, and I fully understand why, if I were young, which is not the case, and I'm not saying unfortunately, why this question is raised, but I think there is an answer on both sides.
That's interesting. I think a lot of this future that you're describing rests on a quite delicate balance between people, the state, and the private sector, which also is fueling growth. But there's been a lot of tensions that came up in the last year or so, especially with the last year being the biggest electoral exercise in history. A lot of people, not only young people, but people of all ages, feel disenfranchised by authorities. They feel like they're taking decisions without asking them, not even for permission, but even for an opinion. But also people have the power and have demonstrated their power to sanction these by going to the polls, and instead of voting for democratic, centrist, historic parties, going with populist movements or even extremist parties. Now, even the relationship with the private sector is a bit contentious, where you have a lot of the biggest drivers of the economy seem to be in bed with the government, not serving people's interests. And there's very little trust in businesses to act responsibly on behalf, seen from the young people that we interviewed in our study. What do you think can be done to create more trust between people, governments, and companies?
Well, first, I think we should distinguish in frustration, critiques, sometimes anger, the issues that have to do with the way our democracies work, and the issue that have to do whether society, business in our market economics, and public power articulate themselves. I believe we have a serious problem in adjusting our democracies to modern times, to social networks, and my own sense of travel is decentralized, i.e., use the possibilities that technologies now offer, and there is a lot of that, to consult much more people at a very low cost and in time conditions which can be extremely fast. And that's the direction, I would say, is to reform our democracies, is keep the principle that we work in representative democracies, i.e., we have to elect people who take a number of decisions on our behalf, and this has to go with a majority rule, but try and bring back to the ground a lot of these decisions that now can be taken back to the Greek agora, in a way. Having a sort of local digital agora is something that's now perfectly doable, whereas it wasn't physically doable before. It's digitally doable today. That's what I would do, which is why, again, going down, polling, including with techniques like deliberative polling, for instance, which is not just polling people, but putting them in a situation to increase their level of understanding of the decisions that have to be taken, whether we do this or that. I think that's the way to go. It's another thing to look at the distribution of power between society, let's say civil society or civil society organizations, business, and public authorities. I believe business can now take on a number of duties that previously was reserved to either NGO campaigning or activism or public regulation. I believe that there are intrinsic tensions and contradictions in market capitalism, and I don't think you need to be a Marxist 100% to understand that. And I think part of these tensions and contradictions have to be resolved within the business system, which is why the sort of RSE in French or DIE in American, I think, are not a thing of the past. I know that the US Trump administration wants to get rid of all this mix between collective duties and profitability. Again, in this case, I don't think there is a contradiction. I sit on the board of an advisory board of a large French company, and I won't give a name, not to do a commercial, but where these issues, what do we do in terms of environment impact, what do we do in terms of social impact, what do we do in terms of gender impact, is embedded in the way the company works. And by the way, if you look at polls, I think business people, in many cases, are most trusted than politicians or even than trade unionists.
Well, it's easier to run a business than to run a country. There's less compromise when you're the boss of a company than when you're the boss of a
But
country.
the trust issue matters, and I think solving the trust issue is more on the side of reforming the way our democracies work, because the traditional way our democracies were working necessitated a lot of trust for people who were very far from you and which you wouldn't trust to take decisions for you. I think a lot of these decisions can now go back to the once good principle of subsidiarity. Only elevate at political power level what needs to be elevated, and what needs to be elevated is what cannot be solved properly at a lower level of power. I think a lot of the problems we have can now be solved at a lower level of power.
I would have one last question about, let's say, a new element into this equation that has the potential to bring about polarization, if not at least chaos, which is artificial intelligence. There's many enthusiasts out there, perhaps fewer skeptics, but a lot of people still don't know how to feel about it. What role do you think that AI could play in boosting competitiveness in Europe without infringing on the relative prosperity that our current labor model is delivering?
I think it's a question which we all have. AI is moving incredibly rapidly. It's not a miracle. It's something we need to understand in order to harness it. For the moment, what I understand and work with in terms of artificial intelligence are what we call stochastic parrots. These machines are not intelligent. They just repeat with a very complex information system what you can find in books, data banks, poems, and composed music. They just go in that and extract from that enough to answer cleverly, apparently cleverly, to your question. They answer properly, statistically, to your question. The big question is whether we understand enough of this to address the problems these machines sometimes have. For instance, hallucination or cheating. That's a domain where I believe we need guardrails. I'm not a big fan of hyper-regulation. I believe when you have such a powerful tool, the limits of which are tested, limits between the machine apparent behavior and human behavior, I think this needs to be considered regulated. I think there is a formidable good potential in AI. If you look at medicines, for instance, targeted medicines are much more efficient and much less costly than carpet bombing as we used to do in the past. I'm working a lot on a digital twin of the ocean to understand exactly how this system works and be able to emulate and simulate them. That's a formidable progress that will cost much less than exploring the deep sea. So scientifically, I think there is a formidable opportunity, although I believe, especially with young people and with kids, that they must be educated in understanding that these are only machines. And these machines can err, and we all know the example of AI being asked what's the difference between a cow egg and a hen egg, and doing a very interesting dissertation on the differences between a cow egg and an egg. So these things need to be brought to the attention of people, not to say this is a stupid system, this is a system that can err. And as we can see now, they can err, but also be stochastic enough to try and cheat. And these are things which I need to be understood. So like most new technologies, they can do a lot of good, they can do a lot of bad. The difference is that they are so rapidly expanding. If you look at the time it took for combustion engines or electricity or TV or planes to penetrate human activities, and you look at AI, it's the speed difference is enormous. So we have to take this into account.
Thank you so much to Pascal Lamy and to Nadia Calvino. It's truly been a pleasure to get to discuss equity with some of the foremost minds shaping the European perspective on that. We'll be back next week. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that you will engage in the conversation on social media. You can find this episode on Instagram and LinkedIn if you didn't already come from there. Thank you so much again for listening. Until next week.